The honourable member for South Surrey White Rock.
Madam Speaker, I will be splitting my time today with my colleague, the Honourable Member for Carleton. I'd first like to send my love and prayers to the family of Diane Law, the dedicated 57-year-old local Peace Arch Hospital nurse and mother who leaves behind her husband and 2 teenage children. Diane died on April 14th from complications of COVID-19 after months battling COVID-19 and all other health issues for our community. As a nation, we've been through an unbelievable amount of pain in the past 14 months, but none more than the families whose loved ones have suffered or were lost. Our healthcare workers like Diane, who put themselves at risk to help others, are true Canadian heroes. Earlier this week, I asked the Prime Minister in question period if he was sure he had no regrets about his pandemic response. The Minister of Health answered by saying she had no regrets about, quote, being there for Canadians and indeed provinces every step of the way, end quote. I was amazed she was able to complete that sentence with a straight face. Every step of the way. How's this for missteps? Step 1, secure vaccines. As of today, 2.7% of Canadians are fully vaccinated. 30% have received only 1 dose. Because public health officials are tying vaccine rates to public health restrictions, these numbers have very real consequences for Canadian families who can't wait to reunite and businesses praying they can tread water long enough to one day reopen. At 2.7%, Canada ranks 76th in the world and second last in the G7. As for the vaccines we do have, this government's confusing messaging and conflicting advice has only caused more stress and uncertainty for Canadians. My constituents are constantly asking me why Canada is the only country with a 4-month wait between doses, ignoring the direction of the vaccine manufacturers and the professionals that the member for Kingston and the Islands says his government relies on. The answer is simple: because of this government's failure to secure vaccines. On Monday, we learned that the European Union has launched a lawsuit against AstraZeneca for breaching their vaccine supply contract. Meanwhile, back home, shipments have been either canceled or delayed countless times. There's a new headline every week, yet this Liberal government sits idly by bragging about the next shipment, which might arrive, reassuring Canadians of the government's diverse portfolio of vaccines. This isn't a retirement trading account. It's a pandemic response amidst an urgent crisis. Canadians don't want 8 different vaccines a year from now. Those who want them want 2 shots of 1 vaccine now. Step 2, secure the border. If they can't secure vaccines, this government should at least try to keep the virus and variants out of the country in the first place through border restrictions and testing. Instead, this Liberal government claimed border measures don't work. In fact, on March 13th of last year, the Minister of Health said border measures are highly ineffective and in some cases can create harm. You don't need to look very far to see that that is false. Atlantic Canada took this approach with many provinces imposing restrictions, and it's worked. PEI has had 179 total cases. Newfoundland just over 1,000. Or take a look at Australia and New Zealand. These countries, 2 of Canada's closest friends and future CANZIC partners, we hope, implemented tough border measures on day 1. This week, 50,000 Kiwis gathered shoulder to shoulder for a concert in Auckland's Eden Park. New Zealand's had fewer than 2,300 confirmed cases. That's not a daily total. That's the total. Australia also acted swiftly and has never had more than 1,000 new cases nationally a day. Pretty good for a country of 25 million people. Enhanced border measures are what my Conservative colleagues and I have called for from the beginning. As far back as January 27th, 2020, the member for Caribou Prince George asked this Liberal government when they would institute enhanced screening at the border. And on February 3rd, the member for Edmonton River Bend inquired about stopping flights from China. For weeks, the Liberals ignored these calls. On March 5th, 2020, the Prime Minister said knee-jerk reactions aren't helpful and that Canada won't limit travel. Of course, the Liberals eventually changed their mind, implementing some of the most arbitrary and difficult to understand border measures in the world. An unsafe, expensive, failed hotel quarantine regime for international travelers arriving by air, but not required of individuals that land crossings, like the ones in my riding. Private plane companies advertising that their international passengers aren't required to quarantine, and a robust taxi business bringing people across the border, allowing people to fly up to the border and then cross in a car. Just last week, 14 months into this pandemic, as cases surged and we're told the third wave was testing the limits of ICUs across the country, this government was still allowing travelers from the world's biggest COVID-19 hotspots to touch down at Canada's airports. Dozens on COVID-positive flights arrived in Canada in April alone, bringing new variants with them. Either this is real or it isn't. Either this is urgent or it isn't. This government seems incapable of making up its mind. Here in BC, travel is restricted within the province. So just last week, a traveler from a country with 300,000 new cases a day could land at YVR, but a grandmother living in Surrey couldn't travel alone by car to wave through a window to her grandchild in Prince George. It wasn't until after countless calls from Conservatives and our leaders' press conference the morning of April 22nd that the Liberals finally listened and temporarily stopped international travel from these regions, and then only for 30 days. The reaction from most of my constituents? Too little, too late. Step 3, secure mental health. In BC, we are facing another emergency fueled by this poor response to COVID-19, a mental health and addiction crisis. In February alone, BC lost 155 people to drug overdoses, a 107% year-over-year increase. In January, the number of deaths caused by overdose was tragically even higher, 174. Overdose deaths per capita in BC are the highest they've been in 25 years. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet or in a House of Commons speech. These are Canadian sons and daughters who needed help and didn't get it. This is another tragedy. The Liberals' first budget in over 2 years doesn't do enough to address the ability of those suffering from addiction to access treatment. Where is the comprehensive recovery-oriented plan to tackle this opioid epidemic? Another notable omission from the Liberals' 700 pages of red ink was the absence of any increase in health transfers to the provinces. Why is Ontario calling for military assistance? Why are businesses and lives closed down? If there ever was a time to spend more within Canada, it would be in these circumstances, and provinces have repeatedly called for this. Mr. Speaker, this government has not been there for Canadians every step of the way. It's time for a new talking point. I'll leave you with this, Madam Speaker. This third wave can be summed up with one word: avoidable. Consider our neighbors to the south, where vaccines have now been widely available to those who want them for months, and where 29% are fully vaccinated. New cases have been steadily dropping since January. The U.S. has avoided Canada's recent surge. American families are reuniting, safely gathering in restaurants and going to hockey games. Disneyland and small businesses from New York to Los Angeles have reopened. Last weekend, Frances McDormand accepted her third Oscar, the same way she did her first two, in person. They're living in a different world, and it's especially frustrating in border ridings like mine. Look around the world: pubs opening in the UK, street musicians and social gatherings in the streets of Moscow, huge festivals being held in China. And where are Canadians? Isolated, isolating, frustrated, and depressed. It's particularly disheartening for the families separated by ever-changing public health restrictions in place provincially because of this Liberal government's avoidable failures to secure the border and vaccines for Canadians who want them. It's also frustrating for the countless businesses that are struggling and those in our community that are permanently closed, like Float House South Surrey. So here we are, 14 months into this pandemic, no end in sight, no road to recovery, more frustration. While our friends and allies around the world are getting back to the things and people they love, we are in the middle of a preventable, deadly third wave that is taking lives, packing hospitals, causing extraordinary stress and mental health issues, leading to record overdose deaths in BC and causing businesses to close for good. This was preventable. This is unacceptable. Canadians deserve more from their leaders. They deserve better. It's time for an urgent response from this Liberal government. That's why my Conservative colleagues and I have been calling for this for months. It's what we're calling for for today, and it's what we'll keep calling for until this Liberal government listens. Thank you, Madam Speaker.